Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 365 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is Sally-Anne Armitage, whom we last met in episode 339, where she spoke about self-care. Sally holds a master's degree in counselling and is a supervisor, group supervisor, qualified adult lecturer and a lecturer in counselling and supervision. She's also a neuro-affirming practitioner who joins us today to discuss a lecture she delivered for the Counsellor CPD Library on the subject of creative supervision. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 365 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly. Rory and I will be taking you through 3 stops today on our counselling journey, starting off with our ethical sustainable practice, where today we're going to be delving into when is the right time to train as a supervisor. This might be something you're considering or may consider in the future, and we'll answer some questions around that. We then go into practice matters, where we welcome again Sally-Anne, as Rory has kind of already said, and she's going to be coming in and speaking about creative supervision. I'm starting to see a bit of a theme here, Rory, but we're going to leave that theme at the door as we go into our student services, where we're going to be speaking about talking to clients about being a trainee counsellor. So this is something from the Facebook group. How do you, as a placement counsellor, explain that to your clients in a way that is respectful to you and the process and to them? But starting us off, Rory, a great topic. When is the right time to train as a supervisor?
Yeah, well, it's a very, very good point, Ken. And I think it's very, very different journey for everybody. Some people find themselves, as I did, in a situation where I was teaching, or you're managing maybe a practice, and you think to yourself, well, I would be happier in my work if I were to be a supervisor, if I understood what supervision was. So sometimes it can be born of necessity. In other words, your career is taken into a place where you're overseeing the work of others, and having a supervision qualification, I think, fulfills 2 specific factors there. One is your own competence and being able to better, fulfill your role. And I think the other is the optics of what it looks like for those you're working with. I mean, if you're working with people and they're reporting to you, or you're running supervision, really you should be a qualified supervisor. You should do a qualification, which brings me to the interesting part of this, really, for me, is that as it stands under the current ethical frameworks here in the UK, the codes of practice, you don't have to be qualified supervisor. The ethical framework says that the ethical frameworks point out that you just need experience. But I think the industry and the profession is heading in a way that would point to you having to be qualified. And also it might be on your journey, your practice journey, you want to take the next step. You want to, fulfill what's sometimes called professional formation, where you move on to the next level of the profession and become a supervisor. I mean, there's lots of next levels. The supervision piece is one step. Some people go to specialise in other routes, and that would be different steps. But I think it's a change in your mindset. You've been a practitioner for some time, you've honed your craft, and then you go on to serve others by becoming a supervisor.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you've kind of touched on the fact that with counselling, at least at the moment, as we make this podcast here in the United Kingdom, there isn't regulation. And I guess as we go forward, it may well be that you do have to qualify to become a supervisor. And I certainly know that as a counsellor, when I was looking around for a supervisor, I wanted a qualified supervisor. I wanted somebody that understood what I was bringing and that there was a level of accountability there. So this is an interesting one, Rory. So you've spoken about that motivation and recognizing within yourself that maybe it is that time, maybe through necessity, working in an agency, they need someone to take on a supervision role. You go and you do the training and you take on that role, or because you think, you know what, I'm ready to do this now. But there are a few hurdles. And I'm talking now, these are going to be the hurdles that are suggested in the curriculum for becoming a supervisor. And I'm referring now to the BACP here in the UK. They have put out a suggested curriculum, and they started off with outlining who might be eligible to train as a supervisor. And you've hit the nail on the head, Rory, when you say, you want to have some practice experience before becoming a supervisor. So it's unlikely that you would graduate your counselling qualification and then go, right, now I'm going to do a supervision qualification, because you don't have the experience and the maturity in practice to be able to maybe guide somebody else's practice in the best way. And therefore, the suggestion is that you will have been in practice for a minimum, and this is the minimum, of around 2 years of actual supervised practice. Or, I think it's around 400 hours, if I'm not mistaken, of practice experience. And certainly on our training course, and I know on other highly rated training courses to become a clinical supervisor, that is one of the requirements. Another of the requirements, specifically on the higher level courses, is that you will be a qualified counsellor, that you hold a qualification in counselling. Now, I guess I could have said that first rather than you need the experience first. You need to be a qualified counsellor. You need to have practice experience. You need to be supervised. And very often, a training organisation will want to have a letter from your supervisor or some communication from your supervisor suggesting that they also feel that you are ready for that step. So it's always a good idea, if you are thinking of training, look at the training providers, choose one that feels like a match for you. And of course, at Counselling Tutor, we do train clinical supervisors, so you can check ours out at counsellingtutor.com. But wherever you do check out what are the requirements for starting that training course, because I think that is a starting point. Now, as soon as we get over that starting point, I think we then go back to what you were mentioning, Rory, about that motivation, but that self-motivation. I want to make a difference. That's why I became a counsellor. And I recognize that by being a supervisor, I can maybe make more of a difference, because I will be supervising the practice of others and they will have their clients. So in a way, I'm kind of making that difference there. So that I'm talking just about internal motivation, and I've used an example of what that might look like. But there's another side to this, and it's, I think, recognizing what the training actually takes to become a clinical supervisor. And I think this is unseen by many until they go and have a look. And I would suggest download the scheme of work. Have a look at what it is that you will be covering in your supervision training. And it may be quite surprising, because as a supervisor, and this is my starting point on this, we are guiding others in their practice. We are helping them uphold standards. Now, in order for us to do that, we ourselves need to understand what those standards look like, and we need to be upholding them ourselves in our own practice. And we need to know how those standards might differ with supervisees who might be working in areas that are not our main focus area. So an example might be, I work as a face-to-face counsellor. I always have. I now become a supervisor, and I only supervise face-to-face because that's how it's been for me. But now I get a supervisee who says, well, I work online. Well, I would need to then go, can I uphold the standards of online working if I haven't trained in that? So that's a very serious question. You'll also be providing support to supervisees. And again, providing support, we need to have an understanding. It's different from supporting a client where we are empathically supporting them. We are supporting supervisees around complex issues, potentially, around legal issues, around confidentiality, around dilemmas, around complaints, around professional accreditation. So there's a number of areas that we need to understand and to be able to support. And then I think the third pillar in the triangle here is encouraging growth. We're providing, encouraging the growth of the supervisee. Supervision, it's certainly a place you bring your clients, but when you bring the clients, the idea is that you may reframe how you look at that. You may reinforce that that was a right decision. You may think, well, that example that I brought to my supervisor, I might do that differently next time because of what I took to supervision. So what you're doing is you're encouraging that practitioner's professional growth within their practice. And that may be speaking about the skills that they have, looking to enhance their skills when certain presentations come up, suggesting CPD opportunities. And it's really you may be helping people fill gaps. And certainly if you work with students, which is often seen, this makes me giggle, it's often seen that working with a student who's in placement is an easier form of supervision. But it's not, because if you're supervising someone that is going through their course at the moment, their formal training, we would need to have an understanding of the theories that they're learning, the skills that they're practicing, the modality that they're working in, to be able to support and encourage the growth within that. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, Rory. And I know if I put this over to you and I said, tell me about the theories here, you're going to say, well, that's normative, restorative and formative supervision, because those are the areas that falls into.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on some very important points here, Ken. And as we'll hear from our external correspondent, Paul Cullen, shortly, supervision has fundamentally changed over the last few years. And it's fundamentally changed because of the online and telephone piece. And nowadays, a lot of supervisees are looking for a supervisor who understands the online and telephone world, because there's a lot of other complexities that go with working online, things like fantasy transference, things like people becoming disinhibited online. And as a consequence of that, you really do have to understand the online world, not just, the cursory ideas of it, you have a microphone and you have a camera, or you work on the phone, but disinhibition effects, black hole effects, fantasy transference, there's a whole, security, safety, all that type of thing. And I think a competent supervisor should have the understanding of this to be able to supervise in that area competently. And to come back to what you said, Ken, there are lots of theories of supervision. There's not just one. On the course we teach Short and Hawkins 7-eyed model. We teach the integrative development model. So we teach, I think we teach about 3 theories on the course. And it's a big step. And one of the big steps, as Paul may tell us when he joins us, is that you go from being a non-directive therapist to being a supervisor, and that skill set is a different set of skills. Because sometimes you have to be slightly directive. Certainly, as you say in the student piece, Ken, sometimes students will come to you and you're the mortar in between the bricks. They go to their training providers who provide the bricks to build their practice. And what you're doing is you're filling in the cracks in the mortar. You're giving the reality of how to apply the theory and the reality of the situation. As I'm sure they do at colleges and universities. I'm sure that tutors are really good at that. But that's what supervision is. Supervision, when you're supervising student cohorts, is about taking them away from the classroom and giving them those clinical skills, helping developing those clinical skills, and also that clinical sixth sense to be able to be competent practitioners.
Yes, here, and it's interesting as you kind of weaving through that. If you haven't yet, if you're thinking, I'd love to be a clinical supervisor, and you haven't looked closely at what the competences are and what the skills are that you'll be developing, it may surprise you. And certainly when I first considered being a supervisor, I thought it might be being with another practitioner, them sharing what's going on in practice, and then me thinking, well, how would I work with that? And then suggesting and guiding around that. And that couldn't be more different. It really couldn't be more different. It's not what we would do in a situation. It's a very, very different process. And part of that process is recognizing the different levels of the supervisees that would come to you and your competence and confidence in working with those practitioners. So you may have, and I've touched on this, a student who comes for supervision. They're going to have very different needs to maybe a supervisee who's been in practice for 3 years. And the practitioner that's been in practice for maybe 3 years is going to have very different practice developmental needs to a supervisor, a supervisee who's maybe been in practice for 15 years or 20 years. And it's about recognizing the difference in the need in the supervisees, and then checking and saying, well, what about me and my practice journey? And do I feel confident in working with the different levels that I may come up against when I'm supervising? So there's just a taste in that. And then I want to touch on one more topic, Rory, just before I hit the ball back to you, and it is the time commitment. This is one of the questions that we get asked very often around our course, and I'm going to say that it's in our handbook. So if you're interested in our course, download our handbook, which you'll go to Counselling Tutor, find our products page, you'll see our supervision course, and you can actually download it there. And the handbook has the whole of the curriculum, what is taught and how that is laid out, but it also gives you an indication of time. Now, our formal taught training is around 3 months. So if I was looking at that, I might go, oh, okay, that's 3 months. So 6 months from now, I'm going to be a qualified supervisor, or 4 months from now, I'm going to be a qualified supervisor. And that is not realistic in most cases. And the reason for that, Rory, is we're going to have to post the learning, do placement hours, supervisee placement. So we're a supervisor seeing supervisees, but they are the same as placement hours that we do as counsellors before we go into formal practice, I guess. And woven into that, you're already in practice when you're at a placement level anyway, as we're covering in our student topic today, Rory. But I think that many underestimate the time, and it can be, and certainly when referring to our course, it's around about 9 months to actually, and that's the average. We have trained many hundreds of supervisors over the years, and it works out to about 9 months. And that commitment, the realistic commitment of can I put that amount of time to it? You've got the first initial learning, which is quite comprehensive. And then after that, then applying that and gaining those hours and putting that in. What's your thoughts, Rory?
Yeah, it's not a quick fix, and it does take commitment, and there is a transition period. Certainly, if you've been a therapist, certainly a person-centered therapist for a long period of time, to then convert into those skills into a supervision scenario can take a little bit of time. And I guess one of the best people to tell us about what that journey looks like is our supervision correspondent, Paul Cullen, who teaches on our course, and he also has joined us today to share his experience of training as a supervisor and some observations with me. So hello again, Paul. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks, Rory. It's good to be here again. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So as you heard, Ken and myself were musing about the right time to become a supervisor. And I wonder, you teach on our supervision course.
Yeah.
You're a supervisor yourself. So in terms of your own journey and what you kind of observe through the people you teach, is there any commonality where people think, maybe it's time to become a supervisor?
I think there's a couple of questions that kind of came up for me when I was thinking about it. It's interesting, we're in January, and, it might be that we're thinking, what does a year hold for me in January? What do I want to do differently? What do I want to kind of improve on, from a practitioner's perspective? And I guess, in January, I was kind of, maybe toying with the idea of what would I have to offer? What would I have to offer potential supervisees? And I started by having a conversation with my supervisor and looking at, why now? I think about my practice. I think about, how that's kind of grown and developed over the years. And, what knowledge base do I have? What experience do I have, which maybe of use to other people? And it was a tentative conversation with my supervisor, whether or not they felt that I was ready, that I had the skill set, because I didn't really understand what it actually takes to become a supervisor, to train as a supervisor, and all the kind of nuances of supervision. And I think it really is a big commitment to make. And it took me a while to actually sort of like settle down with the idea, right, I want to make a start at this. So yeah, I think it's about asking that question, what do I have to bring to supervision? What skill set, what knowledge do I have to bring to it?
Yeah, and I guess there's a reason that, people who recruit supervisors for training, like ourselves, ask for, 450 hours of client work or, a post-qualification of 2 years, because obviously, being a supervisor, what you're doing is you're using your, acquired knowledge and wisdom through the path, the arc and the path of your own practice, to be able to support others, walking the path of developing their practice. Yeah. And I don't think you can become a supervisor straight out of the gate. You get your degree or your diploma, and then you think, right, I'm off to supervision college now and get my supervisor. It's called supervision for a reason, and the super part of it, in my view, is that you're able to see and to some extent impart your own experience. And it's interesting to hear your take on it. I became a supervisor because I was teaching, and one of my colleagues said, you ever thought of doing the supervision qualification? Because you are talking to supervisors, you're having to kind of send students or recommend students to supervisors as part of the course. And that's what really drove me to do it. And I'm jolly glad I did, because it opened the world up to, it kind of helped a lot in my teaching, but also it kind of opened up another area of professional formation for me. My view of counselling opened up. I don't know if that was the case for you, Paul.
Transformative. It really was.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, it was really transformative. And, I thought it was going to teach me a new skill set. It was, going to give me a space where I could offer support to other people. I didn't really consider how it was going to change me as a practitioner, how it was going to kind of broaden my scope, how it was going to develop my internal supervisor even more than it already had been through my own, supervision journey with my supervisors. It really kind of grew that perspective, and I continually learn from, not just from the training, but from, practicing as a supervisor, and that, I continually grow and develop my own practice, and that, so it really is a rewarding journey, not an easy journey, no. and not an easy transition either, and that, because I think one of the things that I hadn't kind of really kind of considered was, it's not counselling. We look at that now and well, it's obvious it's supervision, and that, but realizing that there is a different skill set, there's a different approach. You talk about that super, and it's that idea of being a lot higher up, having a broader scope, a broader vision, and that, so you're seeing a lot of the different elements of the therapeutic relationship when you sat down with the supervisee, and it's not just about the support and the restorative element, and that, there's a lot more kind of formative work. It's about challenging, and that can be quite uncomfortable, can challenge, and that. And within supervision, you're potentially, challenging supervisees' competencies. You're getting them to try and broaden and look at their own practice in a way that they might not have done before. And I think there's a lot more responsibility to supervision than what people might initially consider. They might just see it as a great opportunity to learn a new skill set, to develop a new income stream. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And just to go back to that transition, it is a tricky transition, because for those of us who came from a non-directive, person-centred background, supervision has an element of directiveness in it.
Yeah.
And I say we'll have some letters in the postbag saying, I don't direct people in my supervision. That's fine, really is. But, there is a kind of managerial, small M managerial part in supervision, which is, the more functional part of it, where you may be having to guide or give a view on, maybe someone's had requests from the police for their notes, or there could be something else where you really do have to impart information and be more sort of coach a little bit more. And it was a bit uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know about you, did you find it really uncomfortable to sit in the same chair but have to be, I don't know, more directive or more in more of a coaching than a counselling perspective?
Yeah, and I think, that word directive, and that, and I come from a position of person-centred. So the idea of being more directive was uncomfortable, and more challenging, and highlighting things in a very clear and concise way, because, I've got to be clear and concise in that information that I'm imparting. It was a difficult transition, and to a certain extent it remains somewhat difficult, because there's a potential risk of rupture of the relationship. So it's trying to manage that. So it's balancing out that directiveness, or that challenge with that sort of supportive side, and the rationale as to why we're doing this. We're exploring potentially ethical dilemmas, legal dilemmas. It's a difficult kind of move, and hence, supervision, supervision of my supervision. And that is really helpful to kind of ensure that I'm continuing to do that, within my practice, and doing that in a safe, secure way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I also think that, you get closer to the, for me, I got a lot closer to the ethics of counselling. I found myself when I supervised to be talking about the ethical framework or aspects of ethics quite a lot in my supervision conversation, partly because my ethical body kind of reflected that it should, ethics should be brought up in supervision where appropriate, and also CPD opportunities. So it got me a lot more involved in the kind of ethical side of counselling made me think more of that. The other thing is, it's not a one-way street being a supervisor. I learned loads off my supervisees. I don't know if that's what happened to you, Paul.
So much. Learn so much, continue to learn so much from my supervisees through their own developments and that through the conversations that we've had. Particularly interesting when I'm working with student supervisees who are at the top of their skills game and their theoretical game in that, because they've been really embroiled in it, and and that's been a challenge to me as someone who qualified a number of years ago, and that to really kind of encourage me to go back and look at skills, to look at continually look at the ethical framework, and that to look at the implementation theory into practice. It challenges me, this supervision, and my supervisees unknowingly challenge me as well, and that, which is great, because I think when I initially decided to consider thinking about supervision, it was about wanting to push myself into a slightly more uncomfortable place. Maybe I felt like I was a bit too comfortable where I was, and I wanted to think, I need to kind of grow. I need to continually grow. And the course helped me to do it, and now practice of supervision encourages me to continue to push myself in those uncomfortable places. I'm really grateful to my supervisees who teach me a lot about myself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not all a one-way street. And I think one aspect of supervision that's changed dramatically, certainly since I became qualified, was as a supervisor being not only aware of the online world, but having some insight and training into how to supervise those who work online, and to be able to understand, the psychological aspects of online working, the secure, the kind of safety aspects of online working, and I think a lot of supervisors now will probably supervise in a mixed economy. I know the course that you teach on, Counselling Tutor Supervision course, a little bit of a plug there, has that aspect of working online, and gives supervisors an insight into how to supervise those who work online. But it is an important part of supervision now, and it's more and more common, certainly when I supervised.
Equally so, I think, again, when I was looking for, to train as a supervisor, and I was thinking, well, why and what do I have to offer? I transitioned to working online as a therapist. So I knew that was a skill set that I'd developed, and then realizing that a lot more people were accessing counselling, accessing supervision online. I think understanding the ethics related to working online, the risks related to working online, the laws, around GDPR, around international working, things like that, and that's something, that I found really helpful in my practice now, because I do work solely online, and I do work with practitioners who maybe work internationally. There's a number of things that need to be considered there. So this is something that continually comes up within supervision about, looking at risk, about looking at international law, about looking at the ethics of working, in an online environment and that. So I found that really helpful, particularly in my supervision. And that was one of the niches that I felt that I had to offer, because online work is something that I really enjoy doing. Never thought I would do, absolutely love it. So it became a natural idea to think, well, if I'm going to supervise online, I need to be able to bring that into my supervisory practice.
Yeah. It's a fascinating conversation. And you could ask 100 supervisors the question, when was the right time, to give you a different answer. But at least the listener has two aspects of the reasons why we became supervisors. Very different by the sound of it. So thank you for joining us, Paul, and sharing those insights. And with that, I'll hand it back to Ken in the studio.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. Always lovely to hear from you. So hopefully that gives you more of an understanding, or some thinking topics around supervision. And what we've done is we've created a document. This document covers everything we've spoken about today and a lot more as well. It's quite an in-depth 8-page handout with some references for further reading. So we're linking to the different models, to the different ethical bodies. And if you want to get that, you just go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab. It's right at the top. Click on episode 365. That's the episode you're listening to, and you can download it and you can read over that and have that on hand for your decision-making process. And that is today's ethical, sustainable practice. And I'm excited now, Rory, because we're going to go and hear from Sally-Anne Armitage again. Sally-Anne is one of our lecturers. She also lectures, incidentally, on the supervision training course. But also, the thing with Sally-Anne is she's done a number of lectures for us in our CPD library. She's been on the podcast a number of times. It's wonderful to welcome her back. You have introduced her, Rory, but just remind us, what can we expect now?
Well, as you say, Ken, Sally-Anne is one of the lecturers on our supervision course, and she's going to be sharing with us today some creative supervision techniques that she uses in her practice. Keep listening to this if you're a practitioner or someone who's in practice, because she may share some very, very interesting ways of working that can be adapted for your practice. So it's not just about supervision. What she talks about can be used in your own practice room. But she joins us today talking about creative supervision, and here she is. Supervision is the lifeblood of ethical practice. When delivered creatively, it can be both enlightening and supportive to practitioners and of service to their clients. I am delighted to welcome back Sally-Anne Armitage, a supervisor and a lecturer in supervision who teaches on the Counselling Tutor Supervision course. She will be sharing with me the gems of knowledge she imparted in a recent lecture for the Counsellor CPD library titled Creative Supervision. Sally, it's lovely to have you back with us again.
Hello, good to see you, Rory.
Yeah, of course we can see each other, can't we? Because we're on video. So, I guess, what do we really mean by creative supervision, Sally?
Well, what it means to me, and this is interesting because I was speaking about this only recently with a supervisor I was talking about how maybe a creative approach might be useful in their bit of work with their client. And they started to talk about how I don't know whether I'm very good at drawing, and I don't know whether my client would want to draw either. And that was interesting straight away, like, people have a different idea about what it means to be creative. So for me, I'm going to answer this for me. When I think about working creatively with a supervisor, I'm thinking about something that isn't just words. And I don't mean just words as in that's not enough, because it often frequently is, but it's not just words alone. So for me, my favourite ways of working creatively with supervisees are in using cards. And when I talk about cards, my personal favourite at the moment, and it does change, is the Dixit cards, Dixit. And I also work with the sand tray, but I work with these things in a very, very person-centred way, Rory. No analysis, no interpretation from me. And that's how that's what I mean when I mean working creative. So it's usually cards or the sand tray, and sometimes, well, quite frequently, objects, little figures, animals, stones, objects as well.
It sounds fantastic, Sally. And I think that you talked right at the beginning that, you don't have to be an artist. So I think that can put people off, can't it, when they think, I've never picked a paintbrush up since I was at school, or, what can I do that's creative? But as you say, it's not an artistic skill, isn't it? And do you find that you have to help supervisees move past that block a little bit?
Absolutely. This is a big problem, really, I think. And I don't know whoever's listening to this, I don't know what your experiences have been about, in terms of working creatively. And typically we think about school, don't we? We've got an art class, an art teacher, and that might have played out in a certain way where you perhaps felt like there was people around you that could do this better than you, or you couldn't ever make something look like the thing that you're trying to draw. And maybe you were graded in a way to reflect that. And also, I think about my experiences. I did an art degree when I was in my early 20s, Rory, and I remember creating art from the soul, and my tutors looked at it and says, I'm not sure about that. And it's like, well, I'm sure about it. So I had those experiences of it not being good enough or not being what it was I was seen to be, I should have been creating in the eyes of these tutors. So I've had these really mixed experiences, and these people who are listening to us, Rory, I'm inviting you to throw all that out of the window. All those experiences where you've been judged or you've been looked at in an unfavourable way, because it doesn't need to be that way. We are all artists. Okay, we are all creative souls. When you remove them constraints, when we remove that perspective that you have to be, single quotes, good enough, just enjoy it. Enjoy the materials, enjoy the stuff. Squelch paint between your fingers, squelch clay between your hands. You don't have to be you don't have to be the next Van Gogh.
Yes.
To create.
Yes, and I was thinking when you were saying about your art teacher saying I'm not sure about it. I wonder what your art teacher would have said to Picasso or Wassel Kandinsky or all the other kind of surrealist painters who've pushed art and the concept of art so far forward. It seems that you were working in quite a constrained, or being asked to work in quite a constrained way. And do you think that art, or being creative, more to the point, is a human capacity rather than a talent?
I absolutely do. And I talked about this in my lecture about how we've been creating since the very earliest, scratching on rock faces. We've been creating for thousands and thousands of years. We're drawn to it. And I think something's happening which is causing problems. We're in a world now, like the social media, that we're all very quite linked, or many of us are very linked with the internet. And perhaps there's a bit of an attitude of, that's no good. What are you doing that for? That's crap, whatever. And it's quite a judgmental, in some circles, quite a judgmental world we're living in. And I absolutely want to bring a perspective that is the opposite of that. Do whatever you feel drawn to do. If you want to draw. If you want to write. If you want to sing. You don't have to be wonderful at it to do it. And that's the spirit that I want to bring into supervision. Give it a go. You don't have to be wonderful at it to get loads from it. And that's what I kind of want to advocate for, really.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic, Sally, because I was just thinking when you were saying singing, the singing supervisee, people might think, oh, God, that's, I don't fancy that. But actually, it's human expression, isn't it? It's whatever conveys what's going on in that special moment between client and therapist. And if we're open to that, as you say in your lecture, things could change. I mean, do you find there's a shift in your supervisees once they realise there's no right outcome or right way of doing it?
Oh, there is. And the thing is, quite a lot of them end up going on to become creative therapists themselves because they recognise it. I remember, think about me in context. I'm a Yorkshire girl. I'm quite been raised with quite traditional values. A spade's a spade, 2 feet on the ground. Let's not get too namby-pamby.
Don't be too giddy.
Yeah. Just let's be sensible, you know. So I've been raised with that, and it's put me in good stead in many ways. But what it has also done is it's made, through my early training and my first couple of years of practice, a long time ago now, made me think that these things were a little bit therapisty, a little bit wishy-washy. Yeah. And I rejected all of it. And then one day I was in my own supervision. We're talking years ago now. I was in my own supervision and I was struggling to understand why I was really finding it hard to work with this particular client. And I was looking at it from different angles, and we talked about it for quite a while. And I couldn't quite verbalise this feeling about working with this particular client. Anyway, my supervisor said, well, I'll tell you what, pick an object that represents you and pick one that represents your client. I've got all these objects all around. So I picked one that represented my client, and it was a plastic rabbit with big eyelashes and big eyes. Plastic purple rabbit. And mine, I picked a tall, wooden, featureless figure. And I put these next to each other, and I'm like, they couldn't be more opposite, these two. And I was like struck by these two objects. Am I a plain, tall, featureless wooden figure with all my clients? No. So why am I this wooden figure with this client? And it opened up such richness just doing this. And I think that was the beginning of me realizing that the edge of awareness, the stuff that's just out of reach, that we can't quite hold, we can't quite grab sometimes, can suddenly be brought in, even without us knowing that it's going to happen. When we start working in that creative way, it's quite magical what can happen. It comes back to that, I can't remember who said it, but nothing is by accident. So just me selecting them figures had meaning.
Yeah, and it's a pity we've not got a video here, because when you talked about the edge of awareness, you moved your left hand just outside your peripheral vision. Yeah. So, and if you're at home, not if you're driving, don't do it if you're driving or on a bike, but if you're at home listening, just put your hand just behind where your ear would be and wave it, and you can see a form, but you cannot actually see what it is until you bring it straight in front of your eyes, and that's the edge of awareness. And I do wonder, having been a supervisor myself, and you note this in your lecture, that sometimes those things that sit in the edge of awareness sometimes may feel a bit too vulnerable to name directly.
And I think that's part of some resistance for creativity universally. Not only is it fragile and vulnerable because of our own relationship with our own creativity, but it can also, I think, on some level, we perceive that it might mean that we go there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it brings a potential that can be quite nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And it was like that for me, I think, early on. Like, I knew that if I did work with all these things, that I might inadvertently go there. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? That it's good to go there. If it's safe, always safe. Safety is an important thing. If it's safe, then going there is what we're after, really.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes being creative can sometimes bypass a reluctance to work on a different level. Yeah,
it totally can. It can absolutely floor people. That it does bypass that resistance and that reluctance, and that's why I love it, really. And it's such a tentative and loving thing. It's not. Sometimes when I get my Dixit cards out or my Heartland's emotional literacy cards, those are the two I use most. Sometimes when I get those out, I say to clients and supervisees, this isn't a tarot reading. I'm not going to be analysing or interpreting what cards you pick. It's not like that. And I never verbalise what I think the card has on it. I never give it my own words. I only ever say, I noticed that you've picked that one. Do you want to talk to me about that selection? I noticed. I never say, oh, you've picked that one with a teddy bear on it. I never put and that's how person-centred it is. I'm very tentative with it. Because it's not about me. It's not about what I see. It's about what they see.
Yes.
That's the whole point of it. And that's why it does feel comfortable, because I'm so person-centred, Rory. I'm so passionate. You know this through my work with Skills Academy and stuff. I'm so passionate about it. So I had to reconcile the fact that I was passionate about person-centred, but I also wanted to work creatively. And this is how it fits together beautifully, because I work creatively in a person-centred way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say the edge of awareness and being person-centred, but in my experience, working creatively can sometimes wander over into subconscious processes as well, can't it?
It totally can, and it does. And it's like not just in the edge of awareness, it's out of awareness, but can quickly be brought into awareness. And I think quite often working creatively can bring a lot of emotion, sometimes sudden emotion, because we've gone to somewhere where we didn't even know was there,
Yeah. It can be a bit, we talk about light bulb moments in therapy, don't we? This idea that all of a sudden everything becomes clearer and in focus and more knowing. And in my experience, creative supervision, using the tools and the approach that you've outlined today, can definitely bring that. What kind of supervisory issues do you think are suited to more creative exploration?
Well, certainly the one I described with my supervisor early on was good. Like looking at the dynamic between a supervisee and their client. If you were, and it can work in any. You don't have to have stuff, and that's the thing. You don't have to have objects. You don't have to have any stuff. Working creatively can also include saying things like, if you've got a supervisor who loves films. Yeah, for example, it could be what character would you be and what character would your client be? And if you were in a story together in a film, how might the characters interact?
Yes.
How might it play out? Or it could be book characters, or it could be animals. It doesn't, and I know it's like, I've just said if you work verbally, then it's not creative, but this is working creatively verbally.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
So just going back on what I said, so just, scratch that bit. But it's true, isn't it? We're working creatively. It's almost like we're in our mind's eye got objects, but we don't actually have them in the physical world. We're sort of using them in as heads.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about these characters as though they are, we're sort of manifesting them in our verbal conversation. But things like that is creative working, isn't it?
Yeah, and I also wonder if your experience was like mine, that sometimes it can bring up transferences. Transference, we don't talk about transference on the Counselling Tutor podcast, but we do. We talk about it a lot for those people who've listened. Is where you attribute an emotion and a feeling to someone new. That might be not actually them, but someone you met in your past. It's a bit like a time machine, isn't it? And and have you had those breakthroughs where people have gone, oh, they remind me of X, Y, Z?
I have, and I talk about this in my lecture. Oh, it was so good. We were doing walk and talk supervision, and I'll put it really quickly because I know we're just doing this bit here now, Rory, but I have this thing about, because I'm very informal, down to earth, quite authentic, quite vulnerable, and open in my life, quite available. But also, I'm a teacher, I'm a lecturer, and I've done a master's, and I've got loads of experience, and I've got a YouTube channel. So I've got these two parts of me, and I've struggled to know how do I make that fit together into a whole person who is also a professional, also got some expertise, some skills, but is also really informal and daft and playful. And I've struggled with that. Anyway, so we were jostling with this because it does hold me back. It has held me back. And she said, if this problem wore clothes, what clothes would it wear? This battle that you've got. Yeah. And I said, it'd wear an old-fashioned suit, like a bit Swedish, that sort of. Okay, and does it move? Does it walk, sit? What does it move like? Oh, it's sat down. And she says, okay, and what's this figure's expression? And I says, it's judgmental. It's unimpressed. And I says, okay. And she says, okay. And does this figure say words? Not really, just shush. Shush, And she says, and does it remind you of anyone? and it did. It reminded me of my granddad.
Yeah. It
reminded me of granddad sat judgmentally in his chair. Now, the interesting thing is, because I want to defend my granddad, he never said anything like that to me. But there was something about his gaze that said, speak if you've got something of value to say. Yes. And until then, shut up.
Yes.
He never said that, and he might not have even meant that, but that's what I took from his face. So just there, and I was like, wow. And then we could go into what would you say back? What would you want to say back to this figure? And we went on to develop who would be on my side, who would be the part of me that says you are enough, you are okay to be informal, but also have skill and have professionalism. That is okay to have all of that, you know. And I developed like a heroine that was on my side, but just bringing that into awareness, because I could look at my granddad and say, respectfully, we live in a different world.
Yes.
We live in a different world, and that's okay. That's okay. But I don't need for that to oppress me. I live in this world, and it doesn't have to influence me in that way. And I put a lot of it to bed just in that quickish, like activity thing.
Yeah, we're almost touching on archetypes here, aren't we? Archetypes of the Victorian grandparents and the values that were attached to kind of Victorian sensibilities. Do you think that working creatively helps supervisees feel safer not knowing?
Working creatively helps supervisees feel safer not knowing.
Not being the experts.
Oh, not being the expert. I mean, that's a really important thing for us all to go. I think working creatively helps us see our humanness, the fact that we are made through a myriad of different experiences, and many millions of things are influencing us all the time, and that's normal. It's not because you're a failure. It's not because you're not good enough or you're not a good therapist. It's because you're a human being. And I think working creatively can help us see that there is a lot of stuff going on for us quite a lot of the time. And that's all right. It sort of lays open things that we might not have been able to see. And it's quite a wholesome thing, I think, is that it's all right to be influenced by things. It's human.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think certainly for maybe trainees or people who are newer into the work, it kind of opens up a new avenue of creative working. People may have gone on a course where they've been told they have to be person-centred, or maybe doing TA, or they may have been doing an integrative course, but it may be that it gives a permission, incites permission for them then to bring these creative tools into their own therapy rooms.
Yeah, and I always advocate as well, and I think I do mention this in the lecture, don't just buy the cards and then show up at a supervision session or a therapy session. That's not gonna work. Yeah, you need to get a relationship with these objects, develop a relationship, practice with yourself on your own with the cards. Look at the images, think about what the images mean to you. Practice with peers. Yeah, so get a familiar, I mean, obviously seek training as well, but get familiar with these resources, intimately familiar with them, rather than just because what can happen, you see, Rory, is if you take cards to a session, you can find yourself in a vulnerable position because of the images yourself.
Yes.
So that you don't want that. So you need to be really intimately familiar with these resources.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of let's buy the cards tomorrow and start my work with them the day after. It's a bit more of a thought process than that, I think, and a lot more of a active decision.
Absolutely, and I think some psychologists may call that perceptual defense stats. Where people's perceptions are altered by what they see, and they become defensive by it. So I think you're right. If you're a practitioner, you need to do your own work. With that, and isn't that a great place to start in supervision? You take to supervision and put a little time aside and say, look, I want to use these. Sally.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a perfect place, isn't it?
Yeah, and especially if your supervisor happens to work creatively too, ask them to work creatively with you. Yeah, try it, even if you're a bit reluctant, even if you don't want to. Yeah, just give it a go, because you might be quite surprised, like I was.
Yeah, I actually might surprise people, but I actually like the creative side of things. When I used to teach, we used to get people to make plays and create things. And, when they were doing their skills work, talking, so we'd get them to create something about their lives, and then they'd do a skills session. When we were observing the skills, it's amazing just what came out of a piece of clay with 2 holes in it. It meant so much more. And I think that speaks to art in general. If you ever walk around an art gallery, you notice that they have the art, and you look at it and you go, what the artist is trying to get across. And then the artist usually puts an explanation by the side of it. And I also think that visiting art galleries is an essential for therapists.
Oh, I love art galleries.
Yeah.
There's the place near me, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and we go there at least 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just, there's something, you see, something special happens when we create something that's very unique and very special, and something that cannot be critiqued by anyone, in my opinion. And I know people do critique it, and I know that, I know that happens, but this, whatever you create, whatever you sing, whatever you design, whatever you do is a unique and precious endeavour that is only for you. And I think as soon as somebody sits down and has an intention, like the book of Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art.
Yes.
I'm just finding it because it's on my shelf. He says, just do it. Be quiet, shut up, and do it. Yeah, just do it. Like, if you want to write, stop vacuuming and washing up and going for a run, sit down at your laptop and write. It doesn't matter if you write the alphabet.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You sit down and you write. If that's what you want to do, then you need to do it. And it's not about the outcome. It's about the fact that we are saying, I want to write, therefore I am sitting down and I am attempting to do it. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes.
we need to stop getting so, I think, fixated on the outcome and start seeing the process as the goal in itself.
Well, I think on that wise words that you've just shared with us, it's probably
I'm going on a tangent. Sorry, Rory.
It's all right. It's great. It's a good place to maybe end the interview. Creative supervision is available now in the Counsellor CPD library, and it just remains for me to say, Sally-Anne Armitage, thank you so much for joining us.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counselor CPD library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com. Always a pleasure to hear from Sally-Anne. Thank you again, Rory, for setting the topics, reaching out and holding those all-important discussions. And that is, of course, today's Practice Matters. We now go into student services, and today we recognise students that may be in placement or just about to go into placement, and how you have that conversation with the client about the fact that you're still in training, and what kind of message does that send out? Does that send a message of, you can't have confidence in me because I'm still a trainee? And there are ways to have this discussion. And Rory, of course, we see this question all the time on our Facebook group.
We do. And if you want to join our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You'll find us there and just join the conversation. It's great. It's an interesting one, Ken. So when I first started in practice as a student many, many years ago, when they had horse-drawn carriages, then before aeroplanes, the thinking was it was up to the student, i.e. me, to explain to the client that I was a student. And that was, for a lot of us, was quite uncomfortable. And certainly during one case discussion group we had at college, somebody said that they had a client who just refused to work with a student. He said, I'm not working with a student. And thankfully, we live in more enlightened times. I'm speaking to a lot of placement providers now. They usually, or almost all the time, include the fact that if you're going to a charity, you'll almost, for therapy, almost certainly you'll be working with a student in training. And they put that in their literature. They put that on their outward-facing literature. And they also send that as a letter to the client, usually send it to a letter or maybe an email nowadays, saying that they've allocated someone to work with you and they're a student in training. So that awkward conversation, thankfully, has disappeared. But where it can manifest, and I think where sometimes it can knock students' confidence, is when the client says, I believe you're a student. And, being person-centred, the immediate response might be, so how does it feel to work with the students? What might happen is they might say, well, I don't know how much you know, and I don't know where you are in your journey. And it can be more of a conversation about confidence in the practitioner as opposed to the client talking about what's on their worried mind. So one of the things that we taught, Ken, when we were teaching, if that question was asked, was to say, I'm a student in my final year of supervised training. I'm just coming to the end of my training, which is absolutely true. If you're in your second year of your diploma, you are in fact coming to the end of your training, because you'll have done an introduction, you'll have done a skills, and then you'll go through to going on to a practice-based course, which is a diploma. If it's a degree, same thing applies. You know, you've your final year of your degree. And by saying I'm in supervised practice, it gives more of a reassuring tone. It's more about therapeutic messaging. I think I'm going to call it that, Ken. To give clients confidence. Therapeutic messaging. I wouldn't personally recommend that students go to explore that unless the client came back and said, I'm not quite sure I'm getting what I need here because I think you're a student. In which case, I think that becomes a bit of a different conversation. But speaking to a lot of students, as I do in my daily work here at Counselling Towers, people contact me and email, and we meet up occasionally. It doesn't happen that often, but I think it's a have in your mind that you're a trainee at the end of your supervised training course, under supervision at the end of your supervised training course. Coming to the end of your studies is a very confident message, as it should be. It should be a confident message, because that's exactly where you are. And within a short amount of time, you'll have your cap and gown on in your certificate, and you will be a qualified practitioner.
Yes. So I think that this topic, I get it. And I think we need to be real here. And I want to address that feeling and the reason why so many placement counsellors are asking this question again and again and again throughout the years. This is my opinion and my thoughts on this. I'm going to share it with you. If I wanted someone to fix my roof, and I had and someone says, "Oh, I'm a student. I'll fix your roof," I would wonder. I would wonder if I went to a doctor and I said, "Well, we've got a student doctor here that's going to examine you." I might not feel 100% confident there either. And I think that is where this is rooted in, is how will it be perceived by that client that is sitting opposite you? So here's some givens, non-negotiables. Number one, you have to tell them. They have to know. As an ethical imperative. Yeah, so we cannot ignore this conversation. But what we can do is think very carefully of how we have this conversation. And I'm going to put a word out or a phrase out, and that is frame of reference. Frame of reference. So if I say student, what does that mean in your mind right now? What do you see when I say student? And is that the same for all people? And it's not. It's going to differ. How we view the word student is going to depend on who we are, what experience we've had, and what we think of that word. So there is a different way of having this conversation. You are a placement counsellor. That's what you are. That's why it's called placement. You're going into placement as a placement practitioner. Yep. What would happen if you changed that word? So I would imagine if we say placement counsellor to 100 clients, that they may not have the same pre-built frame of reference around that wording. If I say student to 100 potential clients, they might have a thought or a feeling, and they'll put into that what they think that looks like. But if I say placement counsellor, it may be a little bit more difficult for them to have a frame of reference to fill that gap with, which allows me to fill the gap in. I can paint what a placement counsellor is. Now, again, you still got to have that conversation, but starting with the word placement counsellor, and I'm going to kind of do a bit of a pretending that I'm now doing this. Now, my wording's going to be very rusty because I haven't been in placement for a very long. I had hair when I was in placement, and if you watch us on YouTube, I don't anymore. Okay, so here we go. It may go something along these lines. As it says in the contract, I am a placement counsellor. Let me tell you what that means. This means that I'm in the final part of my training. We've covered all the theory and the skills of being a counsellor, and I now go out into practice and I'm supported by a supervisor, and I still have my learning institution that can kind of oversee and guide my practice. And then I would say, do you have any questions around that might come up for you? Because I've painted a very different picture here. I've taken it from student counsellor, where they can fill in their own gap of what that might look like, and I've said placement counsellor, and I've given a definition, a real definition, a legitimate, justified definition of placement counsellor. And I certainly found that helped me. And I know that, I don't know if it's still the same assignments that are written and put in, but I remember that part of my assignment was actually writing the contract conversation that we have, where we're checking confidentiality and all that kind of stuff. And that's a great place to work, to wordsmith how you would put that over and how you would paint that picture. We have to say it. We have to be truthful, but we can use professional language, maybe, to remove a preconceived bias that someone may have of what a student is. Because student, for me, in my biased opinion, is somebody that maybe is not as good at or is experienced in, maybe doesn't have the knowledge of someone who's a more seasoned practitioner. Now, if I said that to Rory would have potentially a different view of that and go, actually, as a student, you've got the latest theory, the most up-to-date learning, and it's all fresh in your mind, whereas someone who's been in practice for 10 years doesn't. So it's all about that frame of reference. And I think, for me, placement practitioner or placement counsellor was a more comfortable conversation for me to have.
Yeah, I think that's very well phrased. In fact, I think your phrasing was far better than mine, Ken. I think that is a more complete way of putting it across. I think I have two observations. I'm in kind of an agreement with Professor Tim Bond, and Tim Bond is the person who wrote the book Standards and Ethics in Counselling. And a few years ago, I interviewed him when the then BACP ethical framework, the 2000 ethical framework came out, and we got talking about this. And I can't remember if I interviewed him on air or off camera, but this very, very conversation came up, and he said he'd be delighted to be counselled by someone in the final year. He said because they're right at the arc of their training. They'd be very attentive. They'd be really, really keen. They'd be really on point because they were getting reinforced learning every single week from their training provider. And I'm sure, before I get any letters from qualified counsellors saying, so am I. I'm at the arc of my learning, and I'm really focused. It's not just those who are students, but he was making the point that, as someone who wrote a book on standards and ethics, he wouldn't have an issue with working with someone who was, in their final year or a placement counsellor. And I think the reality is also here. People who come in when you're a placement therapist, they have a bit more on their worried mind than your status. That's the reality of it. For those of you who are starting in practice and, maybe have to go through contracting, you'll already know that sometimes you're doing the contracts and the client's talking about what issues they've got. So I found that it's in very, very few cases where someone questions your training status. They're more interested in talking about what's on their worried mind, and with the reassurance that placements that host students who work with the general public have already had that conversation to a great degree, that they have student cohorts counselling. I think I've only ever heard, certainly in all the training groups I've sat in, one person who's ever brought it up. I'm sure it happens from time to time, but I wouldn't fret too much about it. And what I would say is, if you're sat in front of a client, listen carefully to these wise words. If you're sat in front of a client, yeah, and you've been on a training course, yeah, somebody has had a conversation at some point about your capability to be able to do that. So if you've got that far, your tutors and your clinical supervisor and the placement manager are confident that you can work at that level, and that they're pleased that you're there, that they're comfortable that you're working there. And I'd lean into that, because it can be a bit of a nerve-wracking journey starting off in practice. I remember I was shaking a bit when I'd finished. I was shaking a lot.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think that you've hit on what for me is the key part of this topic. I think this is about self. I think it's about how we, as the student or placement counsellor, feel that it might land or be received. And I wanted to go to exactly where you were there, Rory. In order to go into placement, you need what is called a fitness to practice letter.
Yes.
That is, your tutor has said the following: you've got an understanding of the core theory, you understand the skills and the practice, and that you now are ready to go out. It's not like you going out into the room, being with a client, and then going back to your learning institution and learning a bit more of the theory. What you're doing is you're watching the theory that you've already learned come to life. It's very, very different. And not only have you been signed off with a fitness to practice, there are levels of security around that client. Number one, you got to get a placement. And when you go for a placement, and you'll see this is another topic in the Facebook group, very often you're going to have to go for an interview for that placement. They are now checking that you're the right person to go into that placement. Then you're going to take that client work to a supervisor who is going to be checking that you are competent and okay to work with that client. I think clients working with placement practitioners are so protected. They really are, which means that you are protected as the as the placement counsellor. And as a placement counsellor, there in a good agency or organisation, there is going to be a process of filtering what clients you are working with before they get to you, so that you're not given anything that is beyond your competence level. So my closing thoughts on this are, I think this topic is more inside the student or placement counsellor themselves rather than real and live in the room. It does come up from time to time within the room. How to have that conversation is important, and think about it and think about what your wording will be. You can go through this episode again and re-listen and think what you might say, and also be prepared for someone who might say, you know what, I don't feel confident working with you, because I'm going to tell you a secret now. That happens when you qualify as well.
Yes.
That happens all the time. You're going to have these, maybe you have an introductory session where you'll meet with a client for 20 minutes to see if you're a good fit together, and you're not going to be a fit for everybody. And that's okay. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's about the client and their right to choose what makes them feel at ease and safe and held. And as Rory kind of said, as we were going through this, in our professional discussion when we were training therapists at practice level, very rarely would this topic come up. But going into placement, all the time this topic came up. How will I word it? What happens if they think this? And most of that work was around that person, their confidence and their view of themselves going in. Any last thoughts on this, Rory?
Yeah, I think that as I used to say to my students, or our students, Ken, when they sat in the chair on the first day, their diploma, I'd say to them, hold on to your chair and pull yourself in. And they'd look at me very puzzled. And I'd say, that's your chair and you've earned it. If you've got here, you've earned your seat. And as long as you continue to earn your seat, you earn your right to be here. In other words, people didn't get onto practice-based courses by accident. They were filtered and chosen because of their ability, their potential ability to work with vulnerable people and to be able to be, to show the skills and develop themselves as therapists. So if you have a seat, just pull yourself into it because you've earned it, and just hold on to that if it gets a bit tricky. Someone's seen your potential to get where you are.
Yeah, you earn that place, like you say, Rory, 100%. And what's interesting for me is we started this podcast speaking about supervision training and what that really takes, and evaluating whether you're ready. And part of what we covered in that first part was around that you're going to go into placement as a supervisor. So this is something that you may revisit a few times over as you go through the arc of your practice. Why? Because it is best practice to have placement opportunity where you can refine your learning before you're kind of out there in the wild and more on your own. Wow, this has been episode 365 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with ethical and sustainable practice. When is it the right time to train as a supervisor? And Ken and myself discussed what that supervision journey looks like. And of course, we were joined by Paul Cullen, who is our supervision correspondent. There's a handout for that. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com, episode 365 of the podcast, just tick the podcast tab, episode 365. There is a comprehensive handout ready for you there if you're thinking of training as a supervisor. We move quickly on to our interview with Sally-Anne Armitage, again, one of our lecturers on the supervision course, and she talked about creative supervision, maybe useful for supervisors, and I think there's lots of takeaways for any practitioner who may be interested in using Sally's techniques. Very, very good lecture and a very, very interesting interview. And then finally, talking to clients about being a trainee counsellor, how to word it, how to approach that area, and also a little bit of introspection, as Ken said in his final thoughts about is it anxiety in you, a bit of kind of imposter syndrome, and how is the best way to work with that and maybe lean into it. As always, we thank you for your likes, comments, and subscribes. And until we meet again, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.